Doug loved music. I think those of you who've provided the music today. It was beautiful and uplifting, and I know he would love it. I used to joke that the musical genes followed the male lines in his family. I grew up listening to his dad sing at church, and on other special occasions he had a beautiful voice, and Doug's brothers do also. Doug had a pretty good voice. The hard part was getting him to stop singing sometimes. Doug used to look regularly at the Officer Down memorial page, quite often, and I didn't understand it. I thought it was kind of morbid to think about fellow officers that were killed. I thought, how can you go out and do your job after depressing yourself? Years ago we had that conversation, and he tried to explain it to me how important it was to him to be reminded of his duty, the possible cost. But it was hard for me to understand. Doug and I have been married for almost 20 years, and in that time, I've seen the good and the bad, and everything in between, and he with me. And I can say that this career brought out the very best of him, his very best characteristics and attributes he got to use on the job and relating with people. There's so many things he loved about the job. High-speed pursuits were probably number one. Man, he loved that. I remember calling him once, a long time ago, and he picked up the phone and said, "Can't talk, I'm 1080. I said, okay. I hung up, patiently waited hours for him to come home to be able to ask him, what's 1080 mean? He always wanted me to learn the 10 codes. Besides that, he had a knack for being able to recover stolen vehicles. Really. He sometimes recovered them before the owners knew they were stolen, because the driver was acting weird and he'd hunt it down until he figured it out. He loved cars, and that gift came in a lot on the job. Helped him out a lot. I wanted to share 2 stories with you. He shared a lot of his stories with me, the things that made him struggle and the things he was proud of, and I'm so glad he did. Helped me come to appreciate that greatness in him. The first story happened when he was about 3 years on as an officer. He got called out to a house where a young woman had passed away just a couple days after childbirth. It was just a freak accident that couldn't have been predicted. A blood clot took her life. When family members realized they couldn't reach her on the phone, they called the police. The little baby had been alone for a couple hours when Doug and the others arrived on scene. And he told the paramedics that he needed to go find a clean diaper for the baby. But he told me he took the baby into the other room so they wouldn't see him cry. That's what law enforcement is. You're there during people's worst moments. You do what needs to be done, you get them through. The other time is a story where he was able to save someone's life. I remember feeling so proud. There was a call on a couple of juveniles. They hadn't done anything criminal, but they'd done something stupid. And one of them was seriously hurt. So he got called out to the house, made sure fire got there, got him off to a hospital, figured out what had happened. When they were done, his shift was over. It was just after midnight. A sergeant asked him if he was going home, and he said, "I need to go check on the other boy." The other boy had run home before Doug had come out. And his sergeant said, well, you could talk to him in the morning. Doug said, I kind of just want to chew him out, make sure he realizes how serious this was. But I can't stop thinking about him, and I'm not going to be able to go home and sleep. I got to lay eyes on the boy. So he went to his house. From the sergeant's perspective, he heard Doug arrive over the radio. Then he heard Doug call for a medical back. Then they put out patient condition as critical. Then they called for a chopper to land to air flight him. The sergeant called Doug on the phone and said, what have you done? This boy. But he also had been injured, just in a way that he didn't realize. He didn't know he was hurt. His parents weren't home. He'd laid down to go to sleep. And the paramedics told him that he wouldn't have lasted another hour or two. So Doug had come home after getting that boy safely off to the hospital and laid down in bed. He always woke me up. I was used to it. Debriefed the day and told me what happened. And I said, you saved his life. And he said, oh, no. I said, yeah, you did. Paramedics said he wouldn't have made it till morning, and his family would have thought he was sleeping. And I could just feel him smile and take that in and realize, I guess I did. By following that gut feeling, by following through, he got to save a life. That's also law enforcement. About 3 years ago, he was starting to have some chronic pain complications from his illness, and he said to me, I think it's time for you to go to work full time. I'd been blessed before that to just work a little, but focus on raising the kids. And he said, I think I'd feel more comfortable if you got a job and had insurance benefits. I don't know how long I'm going to be able to keep working with how I'm feeling. It's getting worse. So I half-heartedly put out a couple of applications, but I think it was still during that time where it was really hard to get a job. And he came back to me a few weeks later and said, hey, there's an opening in dispatch. You'd be great at that. You've got to put in for that. And it seemed a little scary. I said, I don't know if I can do that. He said, yeah, you're bossy, just like all the dispatchers. Okay. Anyhow, a couple months later, I was hired by UPD Dispatch. We got to work for the same agency, and 6 weeks after I started working full-time, he went off on medical disability. He got into the point where he couldn't make it through the day without painkillers anymore. So it was a blessing for us. He had disability insurance. It was a blessing for us, though, for me to be working and have the double insurance. But the greatest blessing from that came in a different way. He basically stayed in bed that year. It was too hard for him to get up, and I'd come home from work every day, usually around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. By then, he'd have been awake for a couple hours and bored. He didn't like to sit still. He didn't like daytime TV. And so he'd say, come here, sit down next to me and tell me all about work. So I'd try and recount all the calls that had come in that day and the callers that I talked to, and especially anything weird or funny, any emergency calls and how they were handled. He loved it. He loved that hour where we'd sit and talk, and he could stay connected to his work and to the department through my stories. And I got to be a part of that. I got to understand the job a little bit better by being a dispatcher, the types of calls that came in, and just sort of the flow of work. That was a blessing for me to get to understand that side of him a little bit better. About 6 months ago, I transferred into the administration offices for UPD. And I work in there now, and in there I've had a lot more opportunities to meet other officers. Several come in every day. And it's funny because I sit and listen to them talk to each other, and I just laugh because so many of them sound just like Doug. Same sense of humor, same outlook, mindset. I honestly had thought Doug was kind of weird. Now I realize y'all are kind of weird. There's definitely a law enforcement culture. And by coming to know the other officers, I realized Doug was part of that and started to see it deeper. So it's taken me 18 years as a police officer's wife, 2.5 years as a civilian employee for the department, 2 different jobs. But I feel like I understand now. I feel like I get it. I understand why you look at the Officer Down memorial page before you strap on your vest and call on duty. It's because you need to accept the cost in order to be able to serve. And that commitment isn't made just once, but over and over and over again. I've heard it said that the badge makes you one, and I see it now and I understand it. You have to be one to do this job. You have to be. The work requires it, that you work as one. And that's why you're here today and why you've come from so far. Because you have to mourn together to be able to perform together. I love Doug. I never doubted his love for me. I know that he considered falling in the line of duty a great privilege that he probably never would have been lucky enough to have. I know this is the greatest honor of his life. I feel so proud of him, and I'm proud of all of you who wear blue in any color uniform. I'm proud of you, and from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for your service.